So what we're going to talk about this month is looking at social and emotional well-being of researchers. I think we focus so much on participants and on just thinking about our own reflexivity in research, but we haven't really thought much about protecting ourselves, especially when we're doing research that is distressing, sensitive, etc. And I know several of us have been doing research projects that have had elements of being distressing. Siobhan, I messaged you the other day and you said, I'm in a bereavement workshop.
Preparing Black women who've lost babies.
And I said,
just had a baby.
I said, that sounds really heavy. Yeah, that's heavy.
It is heavy.
But equally, listening to things like Santa, I'm thinking of your work with adolescents and just talking about basic everyday needs. You know, some of that it's heavy. It really is. And Sally are dealing with people who have terminal illnesses. Not easy. So I think there's a real need to consider and really think about some of these issues and how we can protect researchers going forward. So welcome to everybody online. The way that we run this is as a hybrid session, so we're going to be chatting in the room here, but please feel free to pop comments or pop up a hand online so that you can join the conversation. So over to you, Rona.
Thank you so much. So I think the two main findings were quite startling. You know, that statement that researchers are being failed, I think was quite hard-hitting and quite effective. And I think the other aspect that this paper brings out is the nature of research is isolation. You're doing it on your own. And they're talking about an isolated fight for survival. And, you know, I think that those two things really shaped how I thought of a lot of research in this unit. You know, I actually sent the article to Johanny, I was telling, and, you know, a lot of the other people here, Megan as well, you know, Joanne, you know, their research, while I was reading it, I was thinking of them. So if we can go to the next slide. So why does this matter? So, you know, we are drawn to study important subjects, and being human, those are often trauma-laden. And, you know, there's violence, there's abuse, suicide, death, addiction. And, you know, as you said, Jenny, is the researchers are basically there to get on with it. You know, you're not the focus, your research subjects are. And there is this increasing PhD mental health concerns. Santo, are you okay? And also, related to that is the lack of institutional standards for researcher well-being. And we'll bring up another point later, but have you ever heard an ethics board worrying about the researcher?
Well, we do, actually. I've got to put my ethics hat on.
That's not right. And in fact,
we do.
You know, but I think that historically it hasn't been the focus, you know, because they're not seen as the vulnerable population traditionally. Maybe things are changing. So ethical responsibility extends beyond participants to researchers. And it's interesting, though, because one of the few things that places that actually has got guidelines for researchers' protection is South Africa. And that came out of the South African Sexual Violence Research Initiative, which identified the risk of researchers in trauma and intimate partner violence, and that was in 2015. So it was one of the standout things that, you know, finally somebody is taking into account the researcher.
So what I liked here was that they were actually talking about two separate issues, I think, that overlap. So they're talking about people who are researching trauma-laden topics, but they're also talking about just general researcher well-being, which I think is something that we've really been trying to tap into and think about. You know, regardless of whether you're doing trauma topics or not, that is important.
Yes, that PhDs or research in itself is traumatic.
Yeah. And I think what they were talking about with that PhD supervisor-student relationship and how traumatic being a student can be. And Sally is laughing. Yes, you've had some tricky experiences through this journey. Hey?
And also working with difficult people.
Yeah.
Sally, you can take the floor if you want.
Yeah.
So what did they want to do? So they did it, in Australia. And they asked, like, what support do researchers receive from university? What barriers prevent access to support? What self-care strategies do researchers use to cope? And what systematic failures contribute to researcher distress? And one of the things that I found in this paper, that there was quite a lot of overlap between the various themes. And I think that this is something we always find, is that one area leads into another, and one problem, has feelers into other problems as well. If we can go on to the other one. So it was obviously a qualitative study. They used that reflexive thematic analysis by Braun and Clark, which is, I did that at another journal article, which is quite hectic.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, I think it's very similar to how we work. It's multiple readings of data, and you have to code until saturation. And that idea of saturation is that there is nothing new coming up. And if there's nothing new coming up, you feel you've reached saturation. So it is a subjective impression, but I think it does imply and tie in with our feelings towards slow research and thorough research.
Although I think Brown and Clark would have a fit if they saw this word saturation, because they're very anti. So I don't know if the authors here actually fully have grasped that.
Maybe they got the ChatGPT summary.
Or they had an editor tell them, well, how did you know when to stop? And they're like, well, we better just put saturation.
So just to put that point across, saturation is a very contested concept. Okay.
Well, I think it is something that almost gives us a bad name, because it's such an easy concept, saturation, but nobody can really.
What does it mean?
Like the honest one is because there's a deadline.
Exactly. Digression.
Sorry.
No. Fun digression.
I think what they do, what was nice, is they got feedback from 4 participants. So why only 4, they don't explain, but I think that's a nice recheck, that what we're saying is accurate.
Yeah.
And they did in-depth semi-structured interviews, which I also like. They didn't stick to a very strict script. They were able to explore and expand. Okay, so they had 42 researchers across 13 universities, a variety of sensitive topics. So mostly females, aged between 20 and 64. And interestingly, they had at least 10 years research experience. So these were not newbies, although maybe the 20-year-old you kind of wonder, but most of them, they said, had above 10 years. And they were recruited via LinkedIn and newsletters. So, I mean, this is the new world, the online recruiting. The interviews were about 50 to 55 minutes. They had a distress protocol in place for the people doing the researcher, walking the talk, and a trauma-informed psychologist available, but nobody actually took this up.
Which is the results in itself.
Yes. I mean, I've also had that, but I think it's sometimes because people find discussing the stuff in the interview quite helpful.
Like that it's cathartic in itself.
Yes, and I've never had, you always have that thing of okay, well, if you become distressed, you can. I've never had a participant take that up.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
They also did very few. They limited the interviews done per day. And this one I actually copied and pasted. The acknowledgement of and reflection upon a priori knowledge experience for positivistic bias. So I think what it is that self-reflection to actually know how your own experiences are influencing the information that you're getting, and it's that insider-outsider debate that I think is important to acknowledge, because I think we all bring something to the the research process, and we all interpret from our own experiences.
It's one of those sentences that you're like, what?
Yeah, but they
read it again.
yeah.
What does this
And make sure you
actually
spelled
mean?
it right. Yeah. Okay. So what were the main themes? And you know, this is where I find that the themes run into each other, which I think happens. And then I'll also just name them, but also what was quite nice is they were looking at possible solutions, which I always think is a lovely thing to do in research. So the sub-theme one was barriers to accessing support. So, you know, the nature of research is you're working alone. You also have you know, no formalized debriefing for some people, although I would argue that that's changing, that now there is a debriefing built into the supervising model for quite a few supervisors, maybe not all.
I think also it depends on the nature of the topic. So the ethics committee, certainly if we see a topic that looks hectic, you know, like Siobhan wants to go and interview dying people, and we're going to say, have you thought about how you're going to debrief yourself?
Yeah.
Or have you got some kind of support mechanism in place? But that's certainly not routine for every kind of study out
I don't think in medical they do that, and it's in, like I think because it's quantitative, so there's this assumption that you won't really be dealing with like, because you're not talking to the person, their difficult experiences. But I think that like medical students and people working in medical environments are automatically exposed to trauma in a way that just becomes routine and like not sort of prepared for. I've had other researchers and doctors say that too. Like I've seen how they've been affected by the environment that they've gone into, and they're not really psychologically supported or prepared for that environment, even when it's just research. Yeah.
And I think also what's tricky is when you have a project where you don't anticipate trauma. Megan, I see your hands up. I'm thinking of you here as well.
Yeah, we would too.
Hi, Siobhan. I think you raise an important point because I think, yeah, I certainly remember being a student as well, starting my master's and not necessarily my own project, but just assisting on projects that were within the department. And yeah, you kind of just expected to be used to that's how it is. And you know, that's the type of research that goes on within the department, and you sometimes aren't prepared for it. I remember being exposed to or assisting on a project where a medical geneticist was working on, it was a quantitative project, but she was basically doing assessments on stillborns. And us having to go to Barra and to Charlotte Matreke to the sort of mortuary sections and sort of assess babies that were born with, that were stillbirths that had that had birth defects, and it was a quantitative project, but still, I think, and there was no sort of debriefing protocol involved. It was kind of just, well, this is the nature of the work and the nature of the project. And I remember being a new student and being quite sort of shocked and taken aback that this was kind of, there was no sort of opportunity to talk about what we were looking at and what we were researching. So yeah, I think it is an omission, particularly within the Faculty of Health Science, because I don't think quantitative projects are necessarily risk-free or trauma-free.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know of many other researchers doing things with, you know, autopsies and mortuary studies and
even
forensics.
with animals. Like one of my first research project, I was also like placed on someone else's project when I was in third year, and it was with rats, and I found it deeply distressing to work with rats because you like essentially doing things to them that are harmful, but it's in the name of the research, and I found it very, very distressing. But it's also just like, oh, this is just what we do. This is just how it goes.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
This is what it is, and I think it'll come up in another slide, but it says like, well, you know, well then don't do this work.
Well, that's what I
know,
decided.
like,
I was like, I'm not going to work with animals.
You're not cut out
That's
for it.
distressing.
Yeah.
But when students and you're depending on the work or the job, or you're under the supervisors, but you know, direction and there's a power differential, it's very hard to say, I don't want to do this. You know,
I mean, I had to finish the project, but then I was like, I'm not going to do that again. But I think it's the thing, you know, in medicine or in medical research, you've got like lab-based projects where it's kind of like, oh, well, you're working with cells in a culture and there's very little, I think, risk of trauma there. But it then expands to, you know, collecting data from stillborns or from like people with cancer or whatever. And it's treated in the same way as if you're in a lab. Kind of, it's the same.
I think the scientists sometimes also are not, just because it's assumed that you're working in a laboratory or you're working in a sort of you're not working directly with people, that it's not going to affect you. But I know a lot of science projects as well, like you say, Siobhan, like if you're collecting like DNA, for example, like you actually have to extract the DNA from a biological sample. So you're often working with placentas, or you're working with like exhumed bodies, or, you know, we had all sorts of weird and wonderful biological samples that were sent to the laboratories. And again, as a student, it's kind of just assumed, well, this is the nature of the area that you're working in and you should, you know, get used to it. But it can be very traumatic.
And I'm thinking too, Megan, of your PhD research, where we had really unexpected trauma coming through in the data. It was genetic counseling data where, you know, there were very distressing scenes between the patient and the counselor. And then how do we process that data? What do we do?
And I think for research assistants as well, I think sometimes we as the main researchers, sometimes, you know, there's focus on you as the main researcher in terms of we're saying it's not always well supported, but sometimes the secondary team also are not well supported. So your people who are doing translating, or your research assistants that are sort of assisting with analyzing data, you know, they sort of vicariously experience trauma by just looking at the data. And that can, you know, sort of, if you're having in-depth interviews with someone and you're asking a second person to please have a look at that data for you, I don't think we often think, I don't know if there are support in place for those individuals as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking also of a project we did years ago in Khayelitsha in Cape Town. And we had a research assistant from Stellenbosch, from a local community there. And she had to travel into Khayelitsha to do the data collection. And we only realized afterwards, when she shared with us, she'd been really terrified to travel on a train and go into Khayelitsha, which is, you know, quite a dodgy area. And we just assumed, oh, well, you know, there's no problem there. She's from a local community nearby. Didn't even think that might be a problem for her. So there was trauma just from traveling into the research site. And I'm thinking of some of our hospital sites and trying to navigate them and finding a way, and the things you see on the way just to walking to the place where you're collecting data can be very traumatic. Sure.
Yeah, so I think we've gone through all these themes in those discussions. So, you know, just to mention them briefly, yes, there are power imbalances. You're a researcher and you're under the mercy of, you know, the powers that be. And also something that I hadn't considered is funding. You know, that funding in two ways. Yes, you know, getting funding is stressful. Then will the funding allow for counselling? Does it provide for counselling too? And if you are admitting that you're struggling, what do your funders do? Do they give you extra time? Do they give you extra money, or do they kill it? You know, so I think that was something I just hadn't considered.
And from experience, I don't think funders really care much.
Yeah,
I don't think
they want to show something for their money.
Yeah, they're running a business. They're not really interested in the welfare of the individual researcher. And I think, you know, maybe that's a very generalist statement. I think there are funders who do care a lot more, but I think there's some who honestly, you know, just tell us your outputs.
Yeah.
That's
within this deadline.
It's, you know, did you finish? Did you complete? Did you, meet the funding requirements. But I was also very struck by what they were talking about for the toxic academic culture. And I actually wrote down the quote. They said, universities are already a pretty traumatic environment. And I think that for me was a very telling statement. And I sat with that for a while. Because I think we do work in an incredibly aggressive, toxic, insecure kind of environment a lot of the time.
Very little funding.
Where it's, dog eat dog, and you step over this one to get to where you want to get to, and it's very ambitious and
also
difficult.
It reminds me of the quote you shared by Virginia Braun the other day on a group. And
yes, that was from Nancy, actually. Yes, it was a post from Virginia.
But the thing I think of feeling like, even if you're a staff member, there's the system that's bigger than you, and that doesn't care about your interests really. That's not really responsive to what the staff actually. I mean, I was thinking about it as I was driving in, because staff, like I haven't paid for parking on Wits. Why do you start, like, if you're a staff member, you still have to pay for parking on Wits? It's like the institution is trying to extract as much as they can, even from the staff members who make it an institution. It's really like, it's like quite cutthroat. It's like,
it is.
They don't care about you, even if you're a staff member, even if you're like part of the institution or part of what makes it viable.
It's very difficult.
I think one of the quotes also just I picked up on as well, that you're also thinking of your future job, because if you are known as the cream puff who gets upset by everything, are you going to get a future job? And one of them says that researchers might not feel safe speaking of trauma or seeking support, or maybe reluctantly or actively discouraged from admitting to feel overwhelmed or poor mental health, because it's considered an admission of weakness. And then a direct quote, consequently, according to Parazou and colleagues, university has inadvertently fostered environments where mental, physical, and emotional struggles and illness proliferate. So, which is going to your point. So I think also the other point there is sometimes you are so focused on your deadlines, you're so focused on what you have to do, that you don't recognize you need support. And I think that's actually often what happens is we're so busy trying to cope, we don't realize we're not. So, it comes to this, toxic academic culture, poor leadership, very competitive with very little money, I think there's a quote about.
Also, just thinking about how difficult it is to get people to participate in research. And when you do eventually get people, you have to be grateful for that and collect, because they are available, because you are on. You have a specific deadline. Just thinking about the research that I was a part of last year, where initially we struggled so much getting participants. And then one time we had people volunteer come. So we spent a lot of time, very short space of time, collecting data. So there was no time in between to breathe. So even time to do your self-care or reflect on the work that you've been doing, because now deadline, funding, that it's coming to an end at this particular time. So if this is not done by this time, then what's going to happen after that?
I think that's such a good point. And, funny enough, though, one of the isolated fights for survival is reflection and gratitude, so actually almost being grateful for the participants and seeing it, but they are your focus, because they are what's going to get you over the finish line, which is what you want. But I mean, they're talking about, and it seems to be quite solo efforts, disconnecting, creating distance, unhealthy habits, social media blackouts, reducing your workload, then, more positive on understanding limits, seeking balance, doing less, this idea of slow research, of understanding boundaries and reflection. And I think that does also come with time. I think as you get older, you get a bit more aware of your own rights, whereas the students maybe not as much.
But I think not just time, but I think also where you are in your career. So if you are a junior researcher You are under tremendous pressure to publish, to produce, to, to get confirmed, get your confirmation, go through probation, get more postdoc funding, get a postdoc position. It's really, really tough to do that. And so you're not in a position necessarily where you can put these kinds of boundaries in place.
No, especially if you haven't got the support of the people above you.
Yeah.
And then it does end up like, just going back to that quote, that Virginia Vaughan quote, then is it we just doing research for the sake of research?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
and that's
because
the tension.
we're giving something meaningful.
Yeah. So there's this horrible hamster wheel.
That thing is also like capitalized on, I feel like, where it's like, okay, well, I feel like I've kind of been exposed to this narrative of like, well, if you're a researcher, you should be doing it for the love of it. So it shouldn't matter how hard it is. Like my friend is she just finished her PhD in Germany, and she was like the working conditions in the university were so intense, and she worked so hard and just expected, oh, but you should love it because you're a researcher. So you should just want to work all the time and have no work boundaries ever. And I think it's also dependent on the team that you're part of, like also this thing, with the isolated thing. Like I feel like here, one of the reasons why I like the HCRU is because I feel very supported in a way that it's like a pocket of support. And it's the same thing that I see with the palliative team at Rahima. They support each other, but the system around them is not supporting them. It's because this group of people have decided we're going to do these things and look after each other in whatever way we can. But like other departments in the university, that's not how they work. So you just,
And I think what's interesting is those units are successful.
Yeah.
And I think that's a positive thing, because I think this next slide is the barriers to accessing support. I think we've covered most of them. But again, it's this participant 29. He said, well, if you're affected by that work, then you shouldn't be doing it. That was her experience of support.
Or I would actually argue against it. I feel like if you're not affected by your work, then you're not really connected or listening to the participants.
Yeah, you don't understand the data. You're not being human. And then who, I think that a lot of people feel this, it's quite tokenistic. So it's on paper or it's paid lip service to, but it's not really doing it. And then this toxic academic culture, and your point, universities are already a pretty traumatic environment.
But I think what struck me as well was this concept of at what point do you seek help, and who makes that decision?
And do you know that you need help?
Yes, do you know that you need it? And I think it's this tension, what we've been talking about, of how do you know what's normal and what's not, and what's acceptable and what's not?
And Sandra's point, look, I just don't have time now. I need help, but not right now because I've got 3 people to
have to finish the PhD. Deal
with it later. Have a breakdown at the end.
And I think also that other thing that and I think, Megan, that this is something that you came across, was this toxic academic culture, and you spoke about it too, Siobhan, is misalignment with personal values. Is that if your research is crossing a line that you feel is okay, that's very stressful. Extremely stressful.
And you can't really do much about it. Megan, did you want to come in here? See, your camera's on.
No, just that I agree. It is tricky when you don't feel supported by your broader team, who are meant to be there as mentors and as who are meant to create space for reflection, and so you often internalize a lot of stuff. And I was quite struck, I think it's on page 9 of one of the quotes is like, a lot of people's first exposure to needing or asking for support is often when they are already in a crisis. So by the time that you recognize that you need help and that you ask for help, it's been those little things that have been happening over weeks or months that should have been addressed. And it's what has initially started as like a small little crumb of concern has now snowballed into this gigantic thing. And by then, I think it's very hard to come out of that hole as a researcher or as a student, when you really don't feel supported by the broader team who are meant to be there to support you.
Yeah. So again, kind of coming back to that concept of what is acceptable. And I think if the role models and the people who are in leadership around you are modeling, this kind of frenetic working till 2 a.m, this is what academia requires, this kind of level of sacrifice, never having a moment to yourself, then that's your only frame of reference. And you think then that, okay, I'm not coping, so then I must be the weak one.
I mean, it's that point of productivity over well-being, that could be. Okay, if we go to the next one, then there's this idea of missing shared responsibility. So supervisors are untrained in trauma often. Ethics committees, apart from yours, focus on participants, not researchers.
Yeah, that is a general claim, and I think it is true. I think there's a lot more focus on participants.
And in a way, you can understand it because they are traditionally the more vulnerable, but I don't think that researchers should be ignored. So that's it. And then no multi-layered safety systems. And I thought that was an interesting idea of multi-layered, is that there's got to be like more than one person responsible for it. And the researcher has to have various ways of accessing care. So it can't just be through the supervisor. She's got to have a supportive network at home or self-care strategies like walking in the forests or whatever it is, and they do mention it literally.
Yeah. So, Megan, do you want to come in here, Megan?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot here.
Yeah,
I feel quite passionate, and I'm glad you chose this paper, Rona. But I think that multi-layered support is so important as well, because I think they mentioned in the paper as well, Rona, where like often for postgrad students, especially if you're at a PhD level, often your only sort of person of support is your supervisor. And if you don't necessarily have a good relationship or rapport with your supervisor to start with, that's not a great point of, you're not going to be sharing how you truly feel with your supervisor. And also if your supervisor is never available to you, that's even more isolating. And I think if you can create like a space, I remember, Jenny, at one point there was sort of a postgrad, like a postdoc room that they created in the Imtom Jenny Center. And I don't know if that's still going, but I remember that being like such a small token. And I was so appreciative at the time of being offered that, because I mean, I think I had a good relationship with my supervisors in general. But as a student, I remember feeling quite lonely because I hadn't really had the opportunity to meet other students who were also going through PhDs or who were also doing postdocs. And just having a room where we kind of all met once a week and we were all doing different research in that, but just to have like, I suppose, fellow students or fellow peers that you could also have layers of support, that it's not necessarily just people who are kind of higher up in terms of hierarchy, that you can kind of find a group of people who are in the same boat as you. I think, Siobhan, you mentioned your friend as well in Germany. Like, I don't know if she had also sort of just, if you can just find like, and I remember like going to those summer schools, like going to the Reach Summer School and feeling so excited about meeting a group of people who were doing the same stuff that I was, who are sort of in the same boat, even if you're doing different research, and kind of those, like the Friday Shut Up and Write group. And yeah, I think those little points of support are so important, and I think is often not available to early career researchers.
Yeah, I can certainly identify with that feeling of loneliness through the PhD and the postdoc journey, and yeah, the need to connect with others who are in a similar boat, but also the need, I think, to engage with and to develop as a team these kinds of small habits that can make a big difference, and small opportunities for connecting and reaching out and sharing. And yeah, I think that's really, really critical.
I want to point out, like with the summer school, the paper that we ended up writing the year that I did the summer school was about how hard it is to do a PhD. like how hard it is to be an early career researcher, because that was the thing that came up when everybody was talking. It was like how hard everybody was finding it. So I think it's, I don't know, it's clearly a thing.
I just think of what you went through in Ireland, and I'm very grateful you made it through here because that's not easy. And I think it's those proactive check-ins that they're talking about is before there's a problem, so that you're helping the researcher almost realize that they need the help. And also just to, being able to access support, because it's not a one size fits all. You don't need it at this point or at that point. It's got to be adaptable, but that it's often not written into policy. And in Australia, that some of the researchers mentioned being shocked by the lack of preparedness of the universities, that this was something that was just not spoken about.
Okay. Sorry, I also just want to, like, when I was doing my PhD and I was doing a project on autism, and I was in the physiology department. And when I spoke to other people, also like projects were so different that like people also didn't really relate to maybe what I was experiencing or having difficulty with. So just like being able to talk to I think it's more similar if you're all working in health communication. I think there's like more similar lenses, and you're working with people and you're working with those kinds of difficult experiences. But like, I'm doing research with children with autism in the government school system, and how that system just felt like a crumbling thing. And then talking to like my friend who's doing like some kind of study on cardiovascular health in a lab, you can't relate on the challenges. Like they're just so completely different, and I didn't feel prepared for that environment, like going out into the world, and that was very stressful. But yeah, like this thing of it, then who do you talk to? Like, even if there are people there, I think what you're saying about the multi-layered systems of support, because I don't know if it makes sense.
If we go on to the next slide, the isolated fight for survival, I quite like that. I think it's probably easy. Okay, so it was this idea of disconnecting and creating distance from the research. That was quite interesting because, again, it's a solo pursuit. So your coping skills almost become solo, whereas, as you were saying, Siobhan, you need to almost connect. So one of the ones that was coming out was avoiding media. Very interesting, taking breaks, alcohol avoidance. Yeah. And then, they didn't mention like running marathons and doing crazy, exercise things, but there's a few in this room that might be using that. Not pointing at anyone.
But I think it's so interesting, because what it's really speaking to is finding things that work for you. But in order to get to that point, you have to do the deep reflection to figure out what do I need. What boundaries do I need to put in place, and what disconnect? And what am I not prepared to compromise on?
And then it's also this need to understand your limit and seek balance, like limiting interviews. And Sandra, like you said, like you've suddenly got all these participants, they're not going to be able to come back. So sometimes you are constrained, but where possible, limiting interviews, adjusting roles, setting boundaries, and again, pointing to that idea of when do you need help, recognizing early signs of distress in yourself. So when you feel yourself pulling back, being aware of that.
Or getting angry about random things.
Oh my gosh.
Like one of my tells is like now getting angry about something that doesn't quite make sense.
Oh dear. No, I've needed help most of my life.
Well, I think that's an important point, that you, when you get to that point where your work and your research is filtering in and affecting your everyday life.
It does, because it's never over. It's always at the back of your head.
Just park it and lock it up. No, there's no lock up and go with this kind of a role. I'm often envious of people who have a genuine lock up and go kind of a job. That you can compartmentalize that, because I certainly cannot. No.
Okay, we go on to the next slide. Still on that isolated fight for survival, is this idea of reflexivity and gratitude, like actually acknowledging that you are in a privileged position, that you are researching something you are interested in, that you are doing something meaningful. And, you know, that reflective process is actually examining what's going well, not just what's going wrong. And I think something that I've certainly had to learn getting older is when you feel uncomfortable sitting in that discomfort, it's okay. You know, you will be okay.
I also want to say about reflexivity is that something I feel we need, like as researchers, you need to be trained and inculcated in. Like when I was at that writing thing with Leslie Swartz, and he at some point went on a thing about how like you can't just say reflexivity and this is who I am and therefore I practice reflexivity. Like I am this and this and this and that's my reflexivity. He was like, it's just performative. It's not. And I was saying, and he was like, it really frustrates me because a lot of people think that this is reflexivity when I write down in the paper, I am an OT and I do this and, you know, like I'm this age or that's reflexivity. And I was saying to him, but like, you have to be taught how to be reflexive. Like you don't just magically come upon it.
It's a bit like saturation.
And again, is it modeled? Is it discussed? Is it brought in? So, you know, if I think even of the work that we've done in the unit over the last 5 years, we've been so much more reflexive than I ever had access to as a student, or, you know, that was modeled to me. You know, and that's something that's really come about from a point of crisis and burnout. Of saying, you know, we need to do things differently. How can we engage differently, more thoroughly, carefully, slowly, finding meaning in the work? Exactly that, and dealing with the discomfort. And that's really, as I say, comes from a point of crisis rather than just waking up one day and deciding this is what I want to do. This sounds like a good idea.
And also just being aware of those multi-layered elements. And I do think it's interesting that, you know, in this group, there are people who do such extreme physical stuff. You know, I think it is something that we need. You know, we need that outlet and interest.
Absolutely.
Okay. If we go on to the next one, sorry, I am rushing a bit. I'm conscious of. So, you know, I think the key takeaways is that there is a lot of trauma in researchers. It's under-recognized, it's not supported, and that there is a sort of assumption that the researcher can deal with it on their own. And it's a researcher's responsibility, not the institution.
But I don't even think it's an assumption. I think it's not even named or acknowledged.
Exactly.
And that is the issue. It's not even, because if there's an assumption, then that means that's known as an issue. I think it's actually, it's not even named. And so maybe the starting point is to name and acknowledge what people are dealing with. That's the first step.
And we, you know, there needs to be university-wide policies implemented and embedded in the supervisory system, you know, and this idea that it's a shared responsibility, you know, between researchers and the supervisors and also the institutions that fund it. I also like that idea of the multi-layered support systems and actually making sure that your researcher is aware of that importance. You know, I don't think most supervisors would say, what are your coping mechanisms? You know, do you go for walks in the forest?
Forest bathing.
No, I'm obsessed with forest, but there you go. So,
yeah, but I think that's so important. I don't think I don't know that I've actually asked a student that kind of question before.
Yeah, and if they say to you, I drink a lot.
What are you going to say?
That is like I mean, we've had that conversation like at Rahima. Like it also happens in the workshops where they'll like ask, you know, what coping mechanisms do you have for dealing with stress, whatever? And some people will say, have a glass of wine when I get home. Like that's my coping mechanism.
Yeah, I remember one of the people, the nurses I interviewed at Rahima told me sometimes you just have to go home and bang the pot. Yeah, and she was deep into pediatric HIV counseling on a daily basis, and so sometimes you do have to go home and bang the pots.
Well done to her. That's all she had to do.
Yeah,
But that normalizing well-being check-ins, that idea of proactive and being aware of if you need help, I think that really is quite hard. And then policies embedded across ethics, across faculties, HR.
That's the tricky one. And having worked a lot more with the sort of more senior management of the university, they are in a very difficult position because their focus is all business and trying to keep this ship floating and keep it from sinking financially. And so often they're not going to be thinking necessarily about policies. And I mean, I think BITS has tried hard in some ways with some of the wellness activities, but at times I think it does feel kind of tokenistic.
It's like a drop in the water.
Again, it seems to be these pockets, because one participant described a helpful team approach to safety in a hospital research study. That idea of having a supportive team around you being really good. And there is some literature on research of vulnerability. There is increasing calls for institutional responsibility, and an acknowledgement of just the pressures on academia. And I think with post-COVID and post this year, I mean, the funding dried up, and it's been terrifying what it's done to well-established research systems, setting back things like HIV research in South Africa by decades. So it's very scary, really, and I don't think it's going to get better.
No, I see Megan's got her hand up. Do you want to pop in here? Megan?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn my camera on. I think what I wanted to say as well is that I absolutely agree that the broader policies and frameworks and that do need to come from a more broader institutional perspective. But again, like whether it's just lip service and whether that will ever become actionable is another story. But I liked what they said in the paper to kind of start with a phased approach and kind of perhaps implement one thing at a time. Or but I often think like a lot of these support systems kind of have to come from a grassroots level. Like there has to be these broader recognition, the broader recognition from the sort of top senior institution. But I think what smaller research teams can start implementing is sort of self-care and reflection. And I mean, I even think sort of the HCOU, where we do that once a month sort of coffee check-in, those are really small habits, and they seem like such silly habits and that, but they really make a difference. And I mean, I even think about my street at the moment. We're having such issues with general sort of service delivery. And people have literally taken it upon themselves to fix potholes in our road themselves. And like on the weekend, there's an initiative at the moment where they've asked families to go and paint a section of a fence that's been like sort of falling apart, like at the bottom of the road. Or sort of, I don't know, it kind of those little actions kind of have to come within the community or the workspace that you're working within, that you kind of, someone within the research unit or within your research team can start sort of cultivating this idea of connection and checking in. That doesn't necessarily have to come from this big, sort of institutional, sort of top-down sort of, because whether that will ever feed through, I don't know. Or it certainly it may, but it takes time.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in the unit with very small ideas, and they don't cost money. It's just getting together on a Friday morning. Yes, and I do too, and or getting together once a month and just sharing a bit about where we're all at. I think it's been incredibly meaningful.
I think, even Siobhan, I think your research has showed that within your sort of other units, like the hospital units and that, like often what people want is just a space to check in and debrief. And they're not like I think it's sort of across so many work environments.
I think it's like communities, like relationships between people where there's a community where people feel supported in doing something. And I think that like our culture makes community quite difficult to create. So there has to be this kind of like active thing of like, okay, we're going to do these things. And sometimes that feels quite hard. I think that that's often a barrier to it, is like, I think that's what needs to happen. I think, you know, we do that here and they do it at Rahima, but it does sometimes feel like an uphill battle trying to get people like in all our little silos. Okay, come, let's do something together, you know.
Yeah, it is difficult. But I think that my favorite quote from this paper is that they say a trauma-informed environment has to be relational, generous, and collegial. And I guess that's really the starting point, is relational, collegial, generous, and thinking about how do we build these multi-layered support systems in a way that's easy, that's manageable. And, you know, like the Shut Up and Write group, I really love, because it means you can come to that group where you're having a fraught morning and you're not feeling great, and you're not necessarily having to talk about yourself, but, you know, you can, there's something shared in it.
Yes.
Just talking about, you know, I had a fraught week, I had 2 rejections on papers, or on funding applications,
Yes,
or, you know, and you can bring
2
that.
funding rejections in one day.
But I've been reading Bell Hooks' Teaching
Oh,
Community,
yes.
Pedagogy of Hope. And like what we've been talking about now, there's actually one quote that I'll take a photo because I can't remember the
Please
exact
send it.
wording, and I'll send it. But all what we've been talking about, like she says, a pedagogy of hope is not just like this blind optimism of like everything's going to be fine in the end, but it's about finding these moments. Because she also, there's actually a statement in her book that I read recently where it is about academia being such a harsh kind of place with what we've been talking about. But she said it's about finding these moments of that they what actually brings the hope. So that knowing and being able to reflect and being able to have gratitude for things like our HCRU, for the debriefing that you get to have at Rahima Musa, for all these little, you know, the Shut Up and Write groups, for all these little things. It's when we place emphasis on that, that's what then also then brings up our hope, and we're able to share that hope with others, then to create communities
beautiful.
in different places. And it really has, it was a nice, like, it's so nice how this ties in with that as well.
Yeah, and I love Bell Hooks because she talks about the need for connection as a
Yes.
very core human need.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay, let's go on to the next one, which was, I always love it when papers tell what their strengths are. So they reckon they had a reasonably large sample size, and if you're doing interviews, 42 is quite big.
Huge.
And it was national, rich thematic analysis, the reflexive approach, and also the participant validation of themes, which I think was good. And I think the limitations are valid. It's Australian. Also recruitment via just, you know, LinkedIn, it's picking up a certain demographic, I think, as well. Mostly female, non-Indigenous. And it's not taking in the global south. They did mention South Africa as having a policy, but they didn't include obviously any of our experiences. And what struck me reading the paper was, you know, sometimes researchers are in physical danger, which is, you know, going into Khayelitsha, and that was never mentioned. So I think like, and I think that is a reality in some of the research that we do here.
Absolutely. If I think of what we see coming through the ethics committee.
I even remember with my master's, because I was doing follow-up assessments in people's homes, I used to send my parents my PIN location and be like, if I don't let you know I'm safe in an hour's time, because I was in all very random areas. I didn't feel safe, and that wasn't even a concern on my supervisor's radar.
No, she would never
go like wherever.
Off you go, collect the data.
So I used to just send PIN locations to my parents and be like, if I haven't responded in an hour, please send someone to find me.
No, and it's a big concern with ethics as well. You know, you see studies of people wanting to go into Bree Street taxi rank down the road here, and then, you know,
this is one of the things for me, like about doing interviews with or like when we did them together. Like obviously there's the methodological thing of like you each get different information out of the interview, but also we went, when there were interviews at someone's house, we went together, both of us there together, which I think made us feel safer.
Yeah, but one doesn't always have that. You know, you didn't have a fellow student or a research assistant. You just literally had a supervisor saying, you go and then come back in 3 months with data. Get on with it.
And let's go to the last slide so that we've just got that implications, which is always my favorite part of the paper. So for universities, there is this need for policies providing specialized support, training supervisors in vicarious trauma, embed well-being check-ins at candidature milestones, and create peer support structures, which is what you mentioned, and what's being done here with things like Shut Up and Write. Funders and ethical boards need to consider the researcher too, which I think they do, but perhaps not funders as much.
Yeah, I wouldn't say funders to the same extent. No.
And then for supervisors to normalize conversations about emotional impact. Sometimes you might be scared of overstepping, but I think it's important. And your point that you made earlier, Jenny, is model trauma-informed leadership and avoid minimizing or punitive responses, and a shared responsibility for mental well-being. That it's part of your research that we check in and find out how you're doing. And then for researchers, because often that's where it has to start, is setting boundaries, the value of proper, your point, Siobhan, reflective practice, prioritizing your self-care. And I think all of us have mentioned this, seek peer communities. Megan, having a room, knowing somebody else is going through something similar, and it's okay in the Shut Up and Write where you've had an hour where you've done nothing that you can actually use. And it's
I'm not very productive.
Incredibly, depressing, because you thought you would be able to do X, Y, Z. You've done nothing.
And I think that's also nice when you hear other people saying, "Yes, unproductive," so that because it normalizes your own unproductivity.
Well, I was going to say it's exactly that need to normalize the emotions and the feelings around the search, and I think as a student often one doesn't feel able to say, or one doesn't know that this is a normal feeling. So I've found even as a supervisor it's very valuable to say, particularly to my PhDs towards the end, if you are feeling like you just are so sick of this, you never want to look at it again, just know that is a normal feeling. Everybody goes through that. And I know you have that point, Salia. Yeah. So normalizing and talking and acknowledging it, I think bringing it out into the open.
And also doing it at multiple points. That this isn't a once-off. Okay, well, you've had your debrief.
You've had your 1 hour on productivity. Carry on.
And it has to be multifaceted. It can't just come from the supervisor.
Absolutely.
So it was such a lovely paper. Thank you.
It was. Thank you, Rona, for leading us through this discussion. Yeah, I know.
Sean, we just finished in town. I was getting nervous.
No, brilliant. Well done. Yeah, no, I wanted to do something around ethics, but also something around this kind of topic. So I'm glad you picked this article because it's very meaningful, and I think all of us are under a lot of pressure. It's hugely pressurizing in this environment, and so just to know that you in a boat with other people who have similar experiences and who we're all just trying to navigate this and to figure it out.
The thing that you're saying about acknowledgement, I think this is what Megan and I were saying about at medical school. Like if you had to say, I feel like if I had to say to somebody, and I never heard anybody talk about emotional difficulty in the physiology department. If I had to say, I'm having a hard time with my research, they'd look at me like I had two heads. Like how? Why?
Just get on with it. Yeah. And certainly, to some extent, there were elements of a model. What was modeled to me as a student was, kind of devil wears Prada, like, get on with it. Off you go. And very much, go away, do your research, and pop up when you've got something worth showing me.
Stop bothering me.
So, and I think it's time to turn that on its head, and it's for me, it's a tricky balance because you still, as a supervisor, are requiring a level of independence of your students. But at the same time, I think there's value in normalizing, acknowledging, and really trying to find out a little bit of, are you okay?
Not wallowing in it, but actually using it as a pivot.
Absolutely, and trying to model, how to do things well. And what's been so incredible to me over the last few years is to find that by putting in boundaries and habits and being strict about things, I am far more productive than I ever have been.
I find
and so the productivity comes from a safe space from boundaries
and being
and
resourced.
absolutely.
Being, well, you can't produce good work if you're not resourced.
Absolutely.
Can't.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for joining online. I don't know if there are any final thoughts that anybody has or that they want to share, but this has been a really meaningful, powerful discussion. And I hope that we are doing enough to support each other. And, you know, if we're not, and if someone has a great idea or they want to come and chat, please share it with us. You know, we're not by any means saying that what we're doing is enough or perfect, or, you know, there's room for growth always. So, yeah, so thank you. And we'll see you next month then for another insightful talk. I think we need to do another ethics talk. So, yeah.
Yes, one more ethics point.
Yeah, so we need to think about that. But yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good day further. Bye.
Bye.